So welcome to the first GRASP seminar of the fall. This is always one of my favorite ones because it's a chance for people to see quickly what's happening among in the GRASP lab at a very high level. We get to see the latest that each one of the different labs is doing. Welcome, my name is Marc Miskin. I'm the GRASP director. This GRASP seminar will be recorded and then posted. Hopefully this will be useful for people to get a quick overview of what we're doing, but also students that are at GRASP, if you want to get involved in the different labs, this is a quick way to see what people are doing. And each one of the speakers will also have contact information so you can reach out to talk to them. One of the things that we are asking for this seminar is that not to put questions in the chat or something like that because we don't have time. Everyone's basically going to go through a quick 5-minute presentation, and then you can see there will be links to websites and also emails if you want to contact the speakers directly. So let me move to the next slide. So just a quick overview of what we have in GRASP. We currently have about 19 faculty members. Grad students is about 250, and you have another 20 or so postdoc and staff. Also, we're pretty excited this year. We've kicked off a new faculty affiliates program. So the number of faculty members are going to grow substantially as well. And we have lots of industry and government participants as well. Also, this year, we're starting a new thing, which we're calling GRASP on Robotics. It's a new series where we're going to change our seminar format. We will have the speaker speak for roughly an hour or so, and then we'll have a panel interaction for another roughly half hour or so. So we've got 8 eminent speakers lined up, and there's actually another slot November 6th that we are currently filling. There was a last minute change. These are again at 11 o'clock every week like normal. You can check those out. It should be a lot of fun. Just a reminder, all these seminars are recorded. You can see what the seminars are, the upcoming seminars on the website, as well as watch previous ones on YouTube. So we've got, I think 16 or 17 of our faculty member labs that are going to present. And the first one is Pratik Chaudhari.
Hello, can you see my slides in full screen? Yeah, so welcome everyone, good morning. I'll tell you a brief introduction of what we do in the Laboratory of Robotics and Learning. If you have any questions, email them to me and I'll be happy to answer them. We primarily do 3 different kind of things in our group. The first one is an attempt at understanding what makes neural networks work, how to make them work better, and in general, the basic principles of machine learning. The second kind of work that we do is understanding how to make machine learning work with few labeled data. And many problems from image classification to robotics fall into this category. And the third one is a little bit of a new line of work where we are exploring what makes reinforcement learning really work and how we can build more robust reinforcement learning systems. To introduce deep learning very briefly, most of you are not new to this. Deep networks are popular, they work well, they are very large and difficult to work with. And one key question that we've answered in the last few years, mostly during my PhD work, is what makes algorithms like stochastic gradient descent so special? If we can understand what makes them so special, how can we build better algorithms for training neural network? And that is precisely what we've done in some of the work over the last 4 years or so. Identify principles in statistical physics and distributed algorithms to make training of neural networks fast. And there are very nice connections of these kind of work with other areas in mathematics like optimal transportation, Bayesian inference, etc., that we have discovered along the way. What are we doing these days about this? This is what I would like to call understanding the principles of representation learning. What we would like to build is a theory that uses information theoretic quantities and understands how these quantities interplay with the capacity of the model class. So this is a bit more theoretical line of work that understands how to build good representations out of neural networks. And the motivation is very simple. So most of you might know the steam engine was invented in the 1750s, and thermodynamics, which governs how steam engines work, was only really built towards the early part of the 20th century. And the key question we would like to ask is, yes, machine learning can do anything and everything, but what can it not do? So just like the second law of thermodynamics tells you that you cannot reverse a process, what can you not do with machine learning? When can you not do these things with machine learning? And speaking of the second law, we're talking about the second law because we have worked on what we call the first law of learning. This is an attempt at identifying things like rate distortion from information theory and putting them into machine learning models. The second kind of work that we do is about understanding how to take models that were trained on lots of frequent classes, let's say cars, cats, dogs, and planes that you will find on the internet, and then translating these models to work with very few samples from some new classes. Let's say these three different kinds of strawberries that a farmer might grow on his farm. We would like to build a model that classifies this produce for him. And we would like to use frequent stuff that we can lay our hands on easily. So this is what is called few shot image classification. This is very easily translated to what is called meta learning, where we're interested in taking robots that you may have in your home or a lab, and then modifying them or learning models for them that also work, for instance, when one of your sensor conks off or one of your joint encoder stops working, so on and so forth. The key nugget of this idea is what I would call embracing the heterogeneity in generative models. So data is always heterogeneous, and that is kind of the key hurdle to working with diverse amounts of data. But instead of getting scared about it, or instead of creating invariances to it, we would like to create specializations to heterogeneity. So we have a lot of interesting recent work on generative models a la density estimators or for tabular data that works extremely well if you want to sample from high dimensional complicated data sets, not images in this case, more of tabular data for now. We are kind of adapting these methods to work well for medical data. So the key problem when you do machine learning with medical data is that it is so heterogeneous. The images from a CT scan that you collect at Penn's hospital are very different from the images you will collect at Harvard's hospital, even if the same person shows up in the two hospitals. And we would like to do clever machine learning that bridges this kind of gap. The third part of our work is on autonomous driving, and this really began a long time ago, around 2012, 2013, where we are building these very rudimentary autonomous cars, which kind of graduated towards full-scale citywide driving. Today, this is kind of a large company called Autonomy, and it can drive in Vegas these days quite well, and also Singapore and Boston. Here is one fun problem that we solved recently in the area of driving. What we're interested in understanding is, let's say I give you one of these cars, let's call it the ego, it's you driving as an autonomous agent, and you're driving in an area with lots of other cars around you. What you would like to do is be aggressive, but not too aggressive, be docile, but not too docile. Essentially, manipulate the cars around you in order to make progress. And this is something that human drivers do very well. We would like to build such qualities in autonomous agents. And here is how it looks. So you see, watch the cyan car. If there is a car incoming on the lane, it stops. And then if the other car stops, it kind of takes the initiative at this point and then goes into the traffic. At the same time, watch it again now. It is trying to merge into a roundabout, and it immediately grabs the initiative. So it's a little bit more aggressive than the other cars around it. That makes it possible, that makes progress possible. And we would like to study these kinds of strategies, which is what we've done in a recent paper. These are the people in our group. We are a bunch of very different people from applied mathematics, robotics, electrical engineering. some of the past members of this group have gone on to do interesting things at different companies, so Qualcomm, Neuro, Northrop Grumman, etc. I will leave you with one single slide. So this is a video that I took from the movie on AlphaGo, which was trying to say, what can a person do, a human being in this case, do to defeat AlphaGo, which is such a powerful machine learning algorithm. And you see the commentator is saying something very, very innocuous and simple. So if you want to defeat a machine like AlphaGo, no matter how intelligent it is as simple as simply pulling the plug and making it stop. So we think of intelligence not just as a machine learning algorithm that classifies your images that lie on your hard disk, but we really think of machine learning, really think of intelligence as a robot with sensors and actuators and learning lying in between that helps it to go around the world.
All right, thank you, Pratik. We're going to have to move on. So I'm going to, the next speaker is Kostas Daniilidis, and Karl will be speaking for his lab. I would like to just remind the speakers that we have to keep to 5 minutes if we're going to make it to the end.
Okay. I'm Karl, and I work with Kostas, and we do a lot of work with geometric and embodied intelligence in the Daniilidis group. This frequently divides into, This divides into three main thrusts that we have. We do a lot of work with neuromorphic sensing. So event-based cameras, spiking neural networks, and moving away from the frame-based paradigm that most cameras currently operate on. We do a lot of work with geometry, investigating 3D shape reconstruction, human pose, equivariance and invariance properties that you can get by exploiting effects of the geometry. And then we also do a lot of work with actions. So looking at various reinforcement learning, model-based reinforcement learning from video and from states, and taking these systems and analyzing how the actions work, what would be good actions to acquire information, and what happens when you don't have actions. So to start with, we have neuromorphic sensing. So these are based on event cameras, which rather than taking an entire frame of data at a fixed interval, they give an event whenever a pixel changes by more than a certain threshold. This gives you a lot of nice advantages with giving you very quick response times, microsecond response times in comparison to, I don't know, 100 frames per second for a regular camera. Good robustness to different lighting conditions, and a lot of interesting things. However, many conventional vision algorithms don't really work on them because the data that's coming out of them is completely different. So we've done work with figuring out optical flow algorithms and figuring out how to make those work. More recently, we're going towards applying these cameras to control of robotic systems for self-driving, for part of reinforcement learning to behavior cloning systems, and driving those around outside and seeing what happens. We also do a lot of work with geometry. So one of the main things we're looking at is equivariance and invariance. Convolutional networks work very nicely because if you translate an image 5 pixels to the side, they respond the same way. But if you rotate the image by 5, 10 degrees, whatever, suddenly the response of the network is completely different. So how do we make it so the networks can handle rotations and handle translations and handle all the different transformations that people can intuitively understand and are important for interacting with the world. And we've done a lot of work with spherical harmonics and other geometry to make it so you can get representations that work well from various angles. And this allows for pose estimation by having these equivariant embeddings, just by comparing the differences between two embeddings. Also, geometry allows us to do a good deal of stuff with pose estimation. Initially, we did this with a lot of objects, and that allows us to pick stuff up. We've since extended this to outdoor systems, more unstructured environments. We've also applied a lot of the work that came from doing objects to working with people, which is much more complicated as people are deformable, have different shapes. And so we do a lot of work with human pose tracking, human shape estimation, and applying many of the same lessons we learned about geometry to these tasks. And we're looking at multiple humans. I definitely don't have time for this video, but we can estimate positions of multiple people using deep learning and all sorts of other stuff. And another project we have relating to this is doing the same things with birds. We have a collaboration with a bunch of people in biology where we're tracking a large number of birds and doing pose shape estimation to try to learn about their social behavior. And next we get into our studies of actions. So action, for a lot of predictive models, reinforcement learning, we're interested in building up good understandings of the world. But how exactly you gather the information for that is non-trivial. So we do a lot of work with figuring out what is good exploration policy, how do you make it so a robot can actually be curious and go out and explore the world, try things that it doesn't know about, and improve its understanding of the world. So it can learn quickly and efficiently in task-agnostic ways. So it can learn to do a lot of stuff. We also do work with learning without actions. So if you have a large amount of, say, video, and you want an agent to be able to do behaviors in the video or learn useful information from the video. So we have work with taking videos of humans, doing various actions, so sweeping, moving objects around, and making it so robots can learn about the environment or how to see things or how to complete those actions by looking at the videos of humans, despite the human videos not having actions, having a lot of domain shift, and basically enabling reinforcement learning, video prediction, and that kind of stuff. Very nice.
Okay, thank you, Karl.
Okay, and
move on.
There's a lot of us. Here's the PhD students from Kostas' lab and our postdocs, and some alumni. And yeah.
All right, thank you, Karl. Next up is Eric Eaton.
Give me just a second, please, to share the screen. Hopefully you should see the slides now.
Yep.
Excellent. So hi, I'm Eric Eaton. I run the lifelong machine learning research group within GRASP. Imagine that we have a robot in the university environment, and the robot needs to recognize a set of objects like staplers, books, monitors. And now we have a new object that's introduced, in this case, office plants, that we also want the robot to be able to recognize. Now, transfer learning enables the robot to build upon its previous knowledge. But what happens if we extend this out to even more objects? Or what if we take the robot and move it to another setting, like a hospital, where now it encounters things like wheelchairs and beds and other objects it has not encountered before? And then we move it to another environment, like a museum, and then another and another. And the idea is that lifelong learning enables the agent to just continually build upon its knowledge over time. So the goal of the work in my group is to develop intelligent systems that can, first off, quickly learn new tasks by building upon their previous experience. As they experience the world, continually improve their models. And we're not interested in robots that are just learn one thing and do it well. We're interested in robots that learn a whole variety of different tasks and do all of them well. And just like you or I, we contend that robots can do this with interaction with other agents as well as humans by, for example, learning from demonstration. And all of this is built around this idea of lifelong learning where we have an agent deployed for an extended period of time in the world. So we built a whole family of lifelong learning algorithms around this idea. It started back in 2013 with our first algorithm called Ella, which worked on classification and regression, and we've since extended it out in many different ways. We've looked at curriculum selection, where you give the agent some control over its environment. We looked at reinforcement learning in lifelong learning settings. We also looked at how do you learn by imitation from humans, where you have a large variety of things that you need to learn from demonstration over time. We looked at how to do autonomous cross-domain transfer, how to do zero-shot learning, giving a description of the task or the environment that you're trying to solve, how to do this in distributed settings with cooperative lifelong learning, and also in deep learning settings. So today I'm going to give you very quick overviews of just two pieces of this work, lifelong deep learning, as well as our work in lifelong RL. So for lifelong deep learning, we developed a framework that takes the basic idea behind the original Ella algorithm and essentially extends it out in various different ways to deep networks. The basic idea is that over time, it acquires these repositories of knowledge which are shared among all different task models, and then figures out how to specialize this knowledge into what's needed for an individual task model. And through this way, we can learn task one, push the knowledge into the shared knowledge base, and then when we learn task two, we can then build upon that shared knowledge base to learn the next task. And as an example of how this works, this is it applied to CFAR 100, where on the left-hand side over here, you're going to see a standard convolutional neural net learning tasks over time, and over here is our lifelong learner. So the idea is that initially, when you start learning task one, performance goes up. Then when you learn task two, the standard CNN performance drops very quickly, and you can see it continues to drop off over time. This is an example of what's called catastrophic forgetting here, where we're just getting interference over time from the tasks. Now, notice in contrast with our lifelong learner, that doesn't happen. It just continually builds upon its experience over time. And so it doesn't experience catastrophic forgetting, but also you can see the overall trend of learning is improved, where as it's learning, it just continues to build higher and higher performance on all the different tasks that the base CNN is simply not able to achieve. Here's an example of a similar approach. It's not that's applied to an RL setting. In this case, we had a robot arm that had to do a whole variety of different tasks, such as move to a specific position, control a hammer, flip a door lock, and use a coffee maker. And the idea is that over time, it could learn new tasks more rapidly and with better performance by building upon this experience that it acquired from previous tasks. Now, there's a large variety of different open issues that we're still looking at. So for example, this idea of transfer across really diverse tasks. What happens if we look where we have non-stationarity in the tasks that we're trying to acquire? How do you do this with building off compositional knowledge in a hierarchical fashion? How do you maintain this knowledge and avoid catastrophic forgetting, avoid essentially retiring knowledge which we still need for the future? How do you do this very rapidly from little data and looking at real-world applications? And we're exploring a variety of projects under this. I've already mentioned the lifelong deep learning. We're looking at compositional approaches to lifelong learning, learning with non-stationarity in the task distribution. We have a big project on open world learning, where we just have essentially an unlimited number of things that we're trying to learn, and we just need to continually build over time. And we're applying this work to perception on autonomous service robots. And lastly, to problems in medicine, including some examples of transferring from other diseases to treat, for example, COVID. Here's a quick example of some videos on autonomous service robots. You can see more if you go to my website, but these are robots we have, which when we're available, allowed to go around the building, we have them running around the building, and we can run experiments in practice. This work is due largely to a number of contributors in my lab, so my thanks to all of them. And if you have any questions or interested in a project within lifelong learning, please reach out to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Next up, we have Dinesh Jayaraman.
So we need to shift back out, I guess. All right. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Dinesh, and I lead the Perception Action Learning Research Group here at GRASP. Like a lot of us, we are interested in building general purpose, autonomous, versatile robots. But if we take stock of where robotics is at today, we notice that a lot of the successes in real world applications have come primarily in controlled factory automation settings. And we've had relatively limited success in delivering on the promise of robots being helpful assistants in our homes, offices, and more broadly in our everyday lives, right? And so if you look at the differences between these two settings, one thing that stands out is that on the left, you typically have fully observed settings with fully modeled, whereas on the right, you typically have many more unknowns and uncertainties. And so I believe that what's necessary, therefore, to make the transition from the left to the right is perception, because perception entails extracting information and therefore resolving uncertainty. And in particular, a lot of the work that we do in our group is built on this idea that high bandwidth perception that delivers a lot of information per unit time, such as through vision, is key to solving many of the remaining big problems in robotics. And so we treat in our research action as both a means to perception and an end for perception, right? And that's kind of a useful organizing principle for many of the projects that happen in our group. But I'll talk about just a couple of these to highlight two broad umbrellas, one under the perception helping action arrow, which is the top arrow, and the other under the action helping perception arrow. Okay, so for perception helping action, the thing I'll highlight today is visual dynamics models, where we are trying to model the evolution of the visual state of a system. And because this is such a difficult problem to do, because you're operating in these really high dimensional spaces, the angle that we've taken to try and tackle this is to build some kind of abstraction that reduces this problem to be more easily tractable and to help deal with problems like accumulating errors over time. So in that spirit, one of the things we've done is abstraction in time, where the idea is essentially to say that rather than trying to predict every state over the course of a trajectory, we instead kind of simplify the problem to identifying important states and only predicting those important states. And this can help dealing with, for example, the problem of accumulating error when you do recursive prediction. And so then you can use this for doing things like decomposing a long-range task into a simpler set of smaller subtasks. So as an example here, given this starting image and this goal where both objects are moved, the intermediate image that's predicted by our system is a sub-goal that says move one object first and then you can move the other. And that makes it easier to kind of execute the entire task. The other kind of abstraction that we've dealt with is spatial abstraction, where rather than trying to predict all the pixels in the scene, you can actually select important pixels to predict, because these important pixels essentially sum up most of what is important about the entire scene to you, right? So in this case, for example, we are modeling robot key points, and the way we do this is by kind of letting the robot move around in the world, and then we have methods to automatically identify which points in the world correspond to the robot. And so we can do that within about 20 seconds of exploration on a robot and help identify sort of which parts of the world correspond to the controllable portion, and then use that for things like visual servoing and executing tasks, even when we might not have a model of the robot or of camera calibration beforehand. And we've recently been working on extending that to neural key point style methods. Here is another sort of fun application of this. This time, rather than trying to model the robot, we're modeling objects through these kinds of key point style representations. And that then helps us to do things like following human demonstrations, where the object is being manipulated, but the robot is not moving in the demonstration. But you can now execute the trajectory of the robot in such a way that you can follow the same trajectory of the object. And we've also done similar things in the tactile manipulation setting, where rather than where we essentially model the tactile impressions on an optical tactile sensor as a kind of object-based representation, and we use it to achieve various in-hand manipulation tasks. Okay, now I'm going to move to the second arrow of using of using perception, using action as a means to improve perception. And so this work is broadly under the umbrella of active perception, where you move your sensors in order to be able to perceive the state of the world better. So here is an example of object or scene recognition with active perception, wherein the idea is that you can move your robot, you can manipulate an object, for example, to get to a more informative view, right? And so we've done this both for object recognition, where over the course of manipulation, you're able to get from a sort of poorly lit oblique view of an object to a better lit, more frontal view of the object, and then recognize its category better. And we've done similar things also in the scene recognition setting, where the agent kind of scans its camera around a virtual scene and then identifies which category that scene belongs to. So we've used similar principles in the tactile manipulation setting, where the tactile sensors are now going to be kind of actively moved around an object to identify which points of contact correspond to stable grasps. And that then, once you've identified a good stable grasp, that's when you lift it off. So I let that video play on in the background and move to another application where we've done similar things, which is reconstruction. So we can train policies through reconstruction, through the objective of reconstruction, that sample important views in the scene that are important to reconstructing the entire scene. And then we've shown that those same policies trained in this unsupervised objective of reconstruction can transfer to a number of downstream tasks. There's also a fun application of, okay. I will move on to my final slide now. Okay, so generally the idea, the organizing principle for many of the projects is that perception can aid action and action in turn can aid perception. And these are a number of the other projects that I haven't mentioned. And here's a snapshot from a couple of months ago of some of the students working in our lab. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Michelle Johnson, and in her lab, Michael Sobrepera will be presenting for her. While he's setting up, I just want to remind the speakers that we should try to keep to 5 minutes. At 5 minutes, I'll kind of jump in and say thank you, just to, if you're running a little late. So, Michael.
Yeah. Oh, here we are. Okay, great. Like Mark said, I'm Michael. I'm in Dr. Johnson's Rehab Robotics Lab. We're a diverse group of folks working to make rehab more accessible, more affordable, and more objective generally, in the motor rehab space in particular. So we're looking at doing neurorehabilitation for people who have some sort of non-traumatic brain injury. So that could be something like stroke or cerebral palsy, brachial plexus injuries. And we do that with a focus towards this global, affordable nature. So how can you make these sorts of systems available in rural areas in America, but also in Africa or in Costa Rica or something like that. In general, you'll see that we've got a few mobile systems, and we're getting more into that space. And then we're also, across all of our projects, we look at how we can pull data out of the rehab interactions and give objective measures where they haven't traditionally existed. So the first project I'll talk about is this Rehab Cares project. The idea here is to help lessen the burden of shortages of therapists by having multiple patients be able to interact with their therapy at the same time, and potentially make that more interesting and perhaps get data back by having these sorts of gamification settings. So in this gym, you have a number of patients who can interact with the different stations at the same time, well, with only one therapist, right? And so that allows you to drive costs down and drive access up. Now, one of the components of that is this TheraDrive, which is a low-cost haptic robot. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to give assistance or resistance to patients as they need it to help progress them. So when they can't do the activities well enough, you can help them get over that plateau, and then as they're getting better, you can continue to challenge them. One of the things that's being done in the lab by one of the PhD students, Kevin, is using this tool as a way to look at the interference between cognitive and motor domains when you're doing rehab. And so if you engage both cognitive and motor activities, what does that do to someone's performance? He's doing this within the context of looking at the interplay between HIV and stroke. So we know that HIV is a predictor of stroke. If you have HIV, you're much more likely to have a stroke at a young age. And so he's trying to understand, how do you deliver therapy to those communities? How do you handle that challenge? Another project we're working on is this, went too far, is the Panda Gym, which is trying to deliver assessment tools to children at a very young age. So if a child has any sort of delay in their development, if you can find that early on, you can deliver therapy at a young age. And because of the neuroplasticity present in young children, you can start to deliver really positive outcomes long term. The thing is that there are a few assessments for young children, but they're really expensive. They require really expert clinicians to be able to perform, and so they're not really accessible. And as a result, they're not as broadly used as one might like. So could you then instead present children with either some stimulus in the form of this toy that has various sensors, can make noise, can light up, or perhaps just observe them directly with using the same pose tracking that everybody else uses in the bottom left, use pressure mats, etc., to try to get at what are the things that that can tell you that a child is developing in an abnormal way. And so this project is actually scaling up rapidly. We've tested, I think it's around 30 subjects so far, but now we're about to test like 1,500 subjects in ICUs and another, I think it's 150 in a newer version of this gym. And so that's being done underneath an R01 that Dr. Johnson won with some other collaborators at Penn. The project that I work on is the flow line of robots. And so the idea here is that we're all doing this telepresence thing right now. And although it works for this sort of, it doesn't really work that well for rehab because the ability to motivate people over this, the ability to communicate with them over this is somewhat limited. And then looking across it, my ability to assess anybody else's motor function over this is somewhat limited as well. And so what if we were to take social robots, put them onto these mobile telepresence platforms that are already used, and use that social robot as a way to engage patients. So play games with them, demonstrate activities to them, help to build that motivation, build that understanding, and then use computer vision and machine learning and all that sort of stuff, coming back to that and do an objective assessment on what the patient's function is. And so we're in the process of doing both feasibility testing on this and testing the effect of that social robot. We also have done some hands-on work where we've got robots actually manipulating people as they move to try to push them towards more ideal motion parameters. I was done using a Baxter. And then a number of other projects looking at how can we do bimanual rehab, how can we do really high speed, kinematic tracking of arms to do assessment again, etc. And so here's some contacts. If you want to reach out, I'd be happy to talk to you, as with the other members of the lab. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. Next up, we have Dan Koditschek. And for our representative from Dan Koditschek's lab is Turner Topping.
Hey everybody, my name's Turner Topping. I'm a PhD student in Dan's lab. And to get this out of the way, if you like anything that you see in the presentation, you want to know more about it, go ahead and shoot me an email at that email address down there. So what do we do in Dan's lab, in Code Lab? So we focus on a lot of different areas of research, but I'm going to talk about kind of three main thrusts here today. The first one is template models and their controllers. The second is this idea of reactive navigation, reactive planning. And then this last one is going to be the compositionality of controllers primarily. So what are template models? So if you remember from your ODE classes what a spring mass damper system is, we basically like to think about complicated systems as behaving like simple systems. So here are two robots. The one on the left is Minotaur, the one on the right is Rex, and they look very different morphologically, but they both are operating under the same principle here, where their legs are pretending to be these spring mass damper systems. And because of that, we can sort of transfer what we learn about one system and the way it behaves and how to write behaviors for it from one to the other within our ability to adhere, what we call anchor these systems to those spring mass damper kinds of things. And as the systems get more complex, we can do the same kind of thing. So here's a student, Jeff, or I guess he graduated now, his robot Inu, which now has a spine that's flexible, and it's actually being driven actively to kind of lengthen the stride and generate more energy to run faster and jump higher. And here's some work by student Wei-Shi Chen, kind of experimenting with these origami structures. So they have very high degree of freedom. They're very hard to control or to control in general. But instead, we're trying to kind of anchor them down to these simple one-dimensional degree of freedom system. And so he's able to get, he's able to juggle, this is like a 1 kilogram shot to different heights with this very high degree of freedom system. And not only that, we like to model our environment as well. And so one of our students, Sonia Roberts, is working on how do we model sand. So sand is notoriously hard for legged robotics, or for legged robots to navigate, because it's so kind of inconsistent and it has this strange behavior. And so it's a very complex interaction. And so what Sonia's doing is she's actually trying to come up with a model for sand that looks, again, something like the spring mass damper system that we know so much about. And when we think about now the robot's leg interacting with the environment, we can kind of think about that as the phasing of these two controllers, or the interaction of these two controllers. So another thing that we like to think about is kind of navigation. So you've seen a lot of different strategies for navigating the environment. Typically what we do is we kind of get an assessment of all the things that are around us, what we'd like to do, and then we kind of solve in some sort of AI or machine learning kind of way what to do. And if something unexpected comes up, we stop and we plan again. But sometimes that's computationally expensive. And so wouldn't it be better if we could kind of react to things on the fly? And so what Vasilis Vasilopoulos has done is he's kind of explored some of these problems, like the warehouseman's problem, which is in the video on the left, was rearranging these students in a warehouse. And he's expanded it to now, so this is a robot just kind of navigating a corridor at Perch, and it's seeing all these obstacles in the way, which it doesn't know about a priori, but it's able to recognize them because it has some kind of machine learning object recognition layer going on. And then it's able to kind of deform the plan that it had initially to fit the new model of the world. And so then you can use these kind of guaranteed methods called navigation functions to sort of guarantee that you'll find sort of the goal that you're navigating to, even as these sort of unexpected things come up. And then finally, what I want to talk about is these things called compositionality of behaviors. And so, you know, it's great that we've written a couple of these behaviors, but wouldn't it be nice to kind of reuse them? And so here's a kind of a typical monkey bar task, whatever that means, where we'd like to, you know, start on one rung and get to the other. And so in this first video here, we kind of swing and lower our energy, and then we hop off of 2 legs back onto the other bar. But in the video on the right, we actually want to skip that middle bar and jump to this one that's 2.5 body lengths away. And the idea is, you know, it'd be awful to have to write 2 different behaviors for this. They share so many common parts, and it turns out that in fact you don't. You can reuse these template behaviors that we talked about at the beginning, and if you're able to parameterize them, you can sort of understand how, you know, one segment will end and where the next one needs to begin. And if you can talk about the sort of guarantees, you know, the conditions under which one piece needs to start and under what conditions it will end, you can talk about stringing these things together in something that's called sequential composition, which is not a new concept at all, but we're trying to expand it into these sort of more dynamic regimes. So yeah, in the hopes of keeping things quick, that's basically all I have to say. Hopefully we get a little bit of time back and I can turn it over to the next speaker.
Wonderful, thank you, Turner. The next speaker is Vijay Kumar. And just while he's setting up it, in case you are wondering, the ordering of speakers here is alphabetical by last name. So Kumar's in the middle of the alphabet and he's in the middle of we're about halfway through. So Vijay.
Let's see, I'm trying to grab control of the screen. Is there a button I should use, or can I just ask somebody to advance the screen, the slides?
You can ask, or if you go to view options at the top and click on request remote control.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Got it. Sorry about that. I missed the instructions. So thank you, Mark, for the introduction and for setting this up. I want to welcome everybody to the fall semester, particularly all the new students. And I just thought I would take less than 5 minutes to give a quick introduction of what we do. This, of course, assumes that I know how to advance slides. I'm not familiar with this interface. Mark, how do I advance this again?
You click your mouse and it should go to the next.
Oh, got it. Okay. First, this is my group. You could see it's a great mix of computer science students, electrical and systems engineering students, and mechanical engineering and applied mechanics students. We are a pretty diverse group in terms of interests, and many students and postdocs work with a variety of colleagues, some of which you've already heard from. So I just want to give you just a very quick overview of the group just so that you can absorb some names here. And if you want to reach out for more information, these are the people who do all the work, and would be delighted to share more information with you. So I just want to talk about, at a very high level, 3 projects we work on. So first, our group works on trying to build completely fully autonomous small aerial vehicles. So in our early days, we started off with vehicles that were 500 grams to a kilo and required a motion capture camera system. And now we're down to the vehicle you see on the top center, a 133 gram vehicle with 2 stereo cameras, a third downward facing camera, and an IMU. And it also has a shell around it, and it's capable of withstanding collisions with the environment as it navigates unstructured environments. It does not rely on GPS. It does not rely on human control. So this is probably the smallest vehicle of its kind that's fully autonomous. And the bottom left, you see what we've been able to do, which is to create swarms of these quadrotors, again, not relying on external infrastructure, relying only on onboard cameras and other sensors. And so as we moved these smaller vehicles, the dynamics of these vehicles gets less predictable. The sensors end up being noisier. The computational resources that you have to reason about the environment, to build 3D models, et cetera, they're just not enough. And so as a result, we have turned to more novel ways of synthesizing control policies. And so one set of ideas comes from our colleague Alejandro Ribeiro's group, where we kind of think of how CNNs can be generalized to graph convolution networks for swarms. And the idea is that if you can train these networks in small groups, could you then extend them to large groups? And so again, you use self-supervised or imitation learning approaches to learn control policies for small groups, and then you extend this to large groups. And then another thing we do is, think about larger vehicles which can be equipped with more expensive cameras and more expensive laser scanners, in particular LiDARs. But again, these are heavier sensors. So we think about integrating information from these kinds of sensors to create 3-dimensional maps. And what you see here is a vehicle that's navigating in a forest. And on the right side, you see the ability to create a semantic map of this forest. So the detection algorithms are trained on 3D LiDAR data, against using supervised algorithms. And then the autonomy stack is essentially built to localize off of features in the environment and fly through these very, very unstructured environments. And you could see this in the bottom left. Recently, there's been a big project that was awarded to the school led by my colleague, Sherry Kagan, which is really about thinking about bringing these technologies to precision agriculture, where the idea is that our robots can act as our eyes and ears and noses, and essentially sniff out information about plants and trees, and be able to customize the kinds of things you might do on a farm to the specific plant, which is water the plant, fertilize the plant, and apply insecticides, and so on. And then lastly, I'm involved in a fairly big project involving, again, many colleagues in the GRASP lab, which is really thinking about the strategic element, the tactical element of making decisions in large robot teams. Ground vehicles, aerial vehicles, fast-moving aerial vehicles, humans, And so how do you think about organizing a team like this to accomplish, to execute complex missions? So the particular mission here that we're trying to illustrate with this schematic is thinking about monitoring an area of several city blocks, potentially from terrorists and intruders. And so you want to kind of defend the area, and the part we focus on is essentially providing situational awareness. That is, imagine a human commander that kind of wants to monitor this area, so we want to let the human commander know if there are suspicious elements, sources of threat, before the threat gets to the human beings. We're less about taking actions, less about taking evasive actions, but more about building the infrastructure to make sure that members in the society can be fully informed of threats. So again, these questions of how do you organize multi-agent teams, how do you build in resilience, how do you think about heterogeneity mathematically, and ultimately, how do you develop control policies for a team like this? Thank you, Mark. Over back to you.
Thank you, Dean Kumar. So, with all these things about planning and scheduling, we have a real-time task planning where our professors are actually the agents here and, not necessarily robust or reliable. So we have to change our schedule. We have to, Nick Matni was the next one, but actually Michael Posa will be our next speaker. And
Okay.
on the fly, we can do our planning and be semi-optimal. Michael.
Appreciate it. Thanks for adjusting to the lack of robustness. So I run the Dynamic Autonomy and Intelligent Robotics Lab. And I will try to be brief here. Our focus really is on enabling robots to more robustly, more safely, more intelligently interact with their complex environments. So yeah, there we go. So we work, broadly speaking, in both the area of locomotion and manipulation, and try to find the intersection between these three topics here, where we're really interested in exploring different algorithmic techniques to enable robots to better interact with their environment, whether that's through touching the ground or through touching objects. And that often means finding and exploiting structure within some notion of non-smooth dynamics. So how do we reason about friction, impacts, contact that occurs inevitably when our robots must touch things, must reach out and try to affect some positive change on the world. And how that structure can be exploited within some algorithmic technique. So for instance, what elements of dynamics are critical to understand within optimization or critical to understand within machine learning, and how does that ultimately enable us to better control our robots to achieve some desired task. So I'll give a couple of sort of current projects going on in the lab. So one thing we've been thinking about lately, this is actually Yu Ming's work in our group, is the role of simple models for planning and control, and in this case, like a locomotion. A pretty common technique that many people use is to essentially control their very complicated robot by making it act like a very simple thing. In this case, you might take your 30-degree of freedom walking robot and say, really just make this act like a pendulum, make it act like a point mass. And by doing so, you can gain the ability to act in real time, to make high-speed decisions, and ultimately, some really beautiful physical insight has gone into these realizations that, at the end of the day, these complicated systems do look a lot like pendulums, or do look a lot like point masses. The question we've been asking, though, is, once you do that, right, once you make this reduction, you've given away a lot of your control authority, you've given away a lot of your ability to perform more complex behaviors. So how do we start adding in that complexity back into the system? And how do we start adding piecemeal in degrees of freedom to the system? And can we do so in a way that maximizes our potential moving forward? So this is, again, Yu Ming's work, looking at formulating an optimization problem where you're explicitly trying to find a simple representation of legged locomotion that you can use for real-time control and planning, but is more capable than, say, a simple point mass might be. Another project we have going on in the lab relates to learning, to machine learning and specifically multi-contact dynamics. So if you've thought at all about machine learning, at the core of many learning algorithms and some of the really beautiful results that Pratik was talking about earlier, lies some notion of differentiability, that the underlying function you're trying to find is in fact differentiable, possibly smooth, continuous, etc. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to think about, say, how this cube bounces and rolls along the ground, I'll play the video one more time. You notice it sort of hits the ground, it bounces a little bit, it skids, it rolls on different sides, it makes contact with both edges and corners and faces of the cube. There's a lot of really complex, non-smooth things going on here. So one very recent project we've been looking at, and this is Sam Frommer and Matt Hellman in the group, is how can we embed some notion of discontinuity? Can we take our knowledge of physics and view that in sort of the right place with the right level of structure into our learning problem, such that this process of identifying what seems like a really hard behavior, this bouncing and rolling and skidding, purely from data, without any a priori notions of geometry, can we do that efficiently? In this case, depending on exactly what formulation we use, we can take something on the order of 5 to 10 tosses of this cube and back out what the geometry and frictional characteristics must have been to get pretty accurate long-term predictions. Another recent project that I'll mention here is control through contact. So this is work by Alp Adinglu in our group. And we're interested in questions of designing control policies that are going to be robust in settings where the robot must make and break contact with the environment. So one particular thing we'd like to leverage here is the role of tactile sensing. So particularly for cases where you may not be able to observe the object you're trying to manipulate, but you do have tactile sensing available, can you still design control policies that are going to be robust or stable? In this case, Alp was using solving bilinear matrix inequalities to generate provably stable control policies for these multi-contact systems. And we're hoping to take this into the future with a joint project with Marc Miskin and James Bakul, as well as others outside of Penn, to a soft robotics project. So we're trying to extend some of these techniques for control through contact into the rather challenging domain of very high-dimensional soft robots. And with that, I'll wrap up and just show a picture of our lab. This is our lab group over the summer. Everyone very, very far away and remote, but we hope we still, I think, had a good time this summer.
Thank you, Michael. Next up, we have Nick Matni, back to our regularly scheduled alphabetical order. Nick.
Yep. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Nick. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Electrical and Systems Engineering, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the work that's going on in our group today. Let's see. Okay. So if you watch some of these videos that are online today, you might be tempted to say something a little corny, like the future is now, and things like that robotics and AR are solved. I mean, these are all very impressive, but if you dig a little deeper, you see pretty quickly that there's still a lot of work left to do here, especially when it comes to endowing these systems with guarantees of robustness and safety. And that's broadly what my research is about, trying to get learning-enabled systems to reliably not fall over or crash into people. So our group's broad approach to achieving this is to combine tools from dynamics and control and the guarantees of robustness, stability, and reliability that they typically provide with the benefits of machine learning and big data, such as high performance, adaptability, and optimality. And our hypothesis is that it's really at their intersection that all of our nerdy hopes and dreams are going to come true. So our work broadly works on problems that lie at the intersection of these two fields, ranging from core theory and applied problems and really everything in between. So what I like to spend the rest of my time doing is highlighting how we've applied this philosophy to one particular problem area, namely understanding perception-based control and how the interaction of machine learning and control manifests itself in this area. But we do work on a whole bunch of other stuff in our group, and I'll have some pointers to other papers on the last slide, but I recommend that you check out our website for more information, and also some other talks if you want to learn more.
So in this broad space, one of the directions that we're looking at is just asking what kind of guarantees, if any, can we provide for control systems that get information about the world using cameras or sensors. So what I'm showing you here are two videos. It's the result of some work that we've done that takes a robust learning and robust control approach to this problem. And our approach here is to jointly learn a perception map from, say, pixels to position of, say, my self-driving car, as well as an error profile that quantifies, say, the mismatch between where my camera thinks I am and where my car actually is. And then to design a robust controller that provably guarantees safety in spite of this joint error profile. And so, as you can see here on the left, a robust controller actually does really well. In contrast, if you look on the right here, this naive controller, which takes what's coming out of my perception map as a ground truth, does okay until it doesn't, and then it just kind of goes off the rails. And so what this really shows is that robustness really matters in this context. And the big technical hurdle in this problem was really we had to understand how we could get this learned error profile to generalize from training time to test time off of our training data. We've also validated this work in collaboration with some of Vijay Kumar's students, Laura Jaron Lipschitz, Rebecca Lee, and Team Yuan, and we put this math on a real quadcopter. And so I'm showing some videos here. We showed that our robust controller could actually match the performance of an optimized tuned PID controller under ideal conditions and outperform it in low light conditions. Another thing that this experimental work also highlighted was some of the limitations of our underlying theoretical framework. And this has led us to some really interesting current research directions, but I also think what this is a nice example of the philosophy that we have in our group of kind of the interaction of theory and empirical validation. So what I want to kind of end with is a complementary direction that we're exploring in this space, which is trying to understand the fundamental limits of learning-enabled control, and we're actually using perception-based control as both a theoretical and experimental testbed. So one of the most powerful and I'd say underappreciated results from robust control are so-called fundamental limit theorems, which tell you that for some systems, all controllers, no matter what you do, lead to bad behavior. So for example, if the problem that you were considering as a toy example was trying to balance a stick on your hand, then control theory tells us that the farther down you look on the stick, the harder the problem becomes. And so you can actually try this at home if you have an old-fashioned pointer and a baseball cap. So if you put the baseball cap on, this kind of simulates the fact that you can't see the top of the thing. And if you try to balance this at home, you'll see it's impossible. And so we can actually use theory from robust control to quantify how difficult this control problem becomes in terms of the distance between the length of the stick L and the point on the stick where I'm looking at it, call that L naught. And we can call this the fragility of the system. So in collaboration with Dinesh and a visiting student from Columbia, Jingxi, we actually built a pi-built simulator of the system, where this black bit on top, if you can see it here, is actually made invisible to the controller. So this actually replicates this idea that you can only observe at this point L naught. And what's nice about this is this gives us a quantitative knob that allows us to crank up the difficulty of the underlying control problem. And we're using this to try to understand how a hard control problem, if the underlying system is fragile, has implications on learning generalizability and RL sample complexity. So for example, one experiment that we've run is to try to understand, does hard control imply hard RL? So what I'm showing you in this plot here is the running reward of a soft actor critic RL agent learning to balance this stick as a function of the number of episodes. And you can see that as we make the fixation point where I'm looking on the stick lower and lower, the sample complexity gets worse and worse. You see this very clear trend that the harder the control problem is, the harder the RL problem is. So there's something going on here that's meaningful. And we're still just kind of starting to scratch the surface here, but this is a direction I'm really excited about. That's going to have some very deep implications, I think, both theoretically and experimentally.
Thank you, Nick.
So this is just a little bit of a teaser. Yep, that was it. So just a little teaser of what we're up to. Here's some relevant papers, and I'll turn things back over to.
Wonderful, thank you, Nick. Next up, we have Marc Miskin. And I just want to give everyone a quick update on where we are. We are running about maybe 15 minutes behind schedule. We We have about 7 speakers left. So we'll probably end about 12:45.
Oh, sorry, those were backup slides that weren't supposed to make it.
Yeah, I was like, I can't talk about that. I don't know what that is. So hi everyone. I'm Marc Miskin. My group is interested in building really tiny robots, so microscopic robots. Now, the smallest thing you can see by eye is about the width of a human hair. And so when I say microscopic, I mean things that are smaller than that. They're so small that you literally cannot see them by yourself. So this image up here is a real micrograph that was taken by me and one of the robots we build in our group. The top thing up here with legs and arms, that's our robot. And this big kind of round fuzzy thing next to it, that's a paramecium. So that's really the characteristic scale that we're working at. I mean, these robots are comparable in size to microorganisms. And the way we build them is our lab basically breaks down into 3 main buckets. So part of what we do is we build components for robots that are sub 1 millimeter in size. So this is a lot of nanofabrication and developing new nanotechnologies. So we build small sensors, small computers, small actuators, things like that. The second is we put those components together to make individual robots, and doing that task requires thinking carefully about, classic robot problems, but in new ways because you're working at this ultra tiny length scale. So thinking about how should robots locomote, thinking about how they should work together, and thinking about applications. And the third one is sort of swarms of these things. So the third bucket is, okay, you've got components, you put those together to make robots, you've got robots, and we can make millions of those. So how do they interact in order to do useful things? Can we make materials out of them? Can we use them to make materials? Can we have them interact with biological systems? So looking at these things as sort of collectives and emergent behaviors that come out of those. So let me show you some, let's see. So I should be able to advance the slides. Okay, cool. So let me show you one of these little guys in action. So this is our very simple robot, but it gives you a gist of kind of what we do. So the robot breaks down into 2 main parts. It's got a body, and inside of the body are standard silicon microelectronics. And then connected to those are electronically controllable actuators. So those form its arms and legs. This robot has a really simple design. It's just a series of solar cells on it. And by shooting laser light into the solar cells, we can trigger the actuators to move. And so what you can see is this little laser dot is hopping back and forth. That's me firing laser light in to drive these little actuators. And off goes this robot marching around the microscopic world. One of the things I think is really cool about this movie is if you look around the robot, you can see there's this little dust jiggling around. That's Brownian motion. So this robot is so small that if you made it just a factor of 10 to 100 times smaller, it would begin to diffuse around due to collisions from the water molecules that are surrounding it. So again, it just gives you a sense of how small this little tiny device is. Now, one of the cool things about this robot, Cybertech that's really tiny, is that we make these things using essentially the toolkit that was developed by the microelectronics industry. And one of the consequences of doing that is that we can build these devices massively at scale. So this is a movie showing the last stages of our fabrication process. What we're doing is we're etching out the substrate, the foundation underneath the robots to release them into their final geometry. This movie's real time, so this is actually the time scale at which this takes place. And you can see that once that surface underneath the robots dissolves, they fold up into their final target structures. Now what's cool here is that this is just a small subset of the overall field of view. Even though in this frame there's a couple hundred robots, this was representative of a chip that had 10,000 robots that was cut from a wafer that had 1 million robots on it. And we can build and deploy these things massively at scale. So what are we doing now? Well, this is a pretty dumb robot. It doesn't have any real sensors, any real intelligence. In some ways, you could argue it's not really a robot at all. But what's neat about this little proof of concept device is that all of the systems that this thing uses for powering and locomoting are plug and play with standard silicon microelectronic circuitry. And so what my group is up to now is we're developing little widgets that you would want to do robotics at this length scale. So we're building little voltmeters, say, that we can put on this robot so it can sense things in the fluid around it. We're building little thermometers so it can detect, temperature gradients or follow them. We're putting little LEDs on the robot so that they can blink back to us data about what they learn about the world around them, and we can blink instructions and data back to them by shooting it through optical pulses and light. So this is kind of the vision is, there's a fair amount of technology that we can steal from the microelectronics industry. And we're now in a position to start basically putting legs on those and turning them into systems that move, that actuate, that sense, that do stuff. So that's the story for our lab. I just wanted to take the last couple seconds, right, to one, show you one more cool movie of one of these robots running around, but two, to tell you, specific projects of what we're actually working on. So the three big things that we're playing with in my lab currently are, we have a project about building smart micro-robots. So building systems where these devices are actually programmable, where you can write instructions to them and then they'll carry out an onboard program that they have. So this builds a lot on just borrowing technologies from the semiconductor industry. A second project is an actual application. So using micro robots to stretch grow cells. So particularly neurons, for a lot of neurosurgical replacements, you need to grow neurons to specific lengths and shapes by applying mechanical forces to them. It turns out that the sizes and forces that you need to do that are consistent with the sizes and forces that our little robots can put out. And so we're working on a platform where we can chemically functionalize these robots to coax neurons into growing on them, and then use the robot to stretch the neurons to grow in specific shapes and patterns. And a third project we're working on are materials made from micro robots. So the idea here is to build little robots that can perform electrochemistry to grow metal on their surfaces. And the idea is that robots will be able to walk over to each other, form bonds between one another, dissociate those bonds based on sensor data, and kind of build really weird, programmable, smart materials. So that's the general gist of my lab. I'm going to end it there, though, to take, to keep things moving. And if you have any questions at all about what we're doing, feel free to reach out to me by email.
Great, thank you, Mark. Next up, we've got George Pappas. And representative for George Pappas's group is Yiannis Kantaros. Yiannis, if you are ready. I don't know if you're muted. Yeah, you're muted. I'm trying to unmute you.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I think there is, and also feel free to turn on the camera if that's possible. Something is wrong with my mic as well. So can I start?
Yes, please do.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Okay. I think I have an issue with going to the next slides.
You're gonna want to full screen it. Click on the full screen, like presenter thing, just to the right.
Okay, yeah, I think now it should be fine. Okay, great. Sorry about this. So yeah, I'm Yiannis. I'm a postdoc working with George Pappas, and today I will talk a little bit about our recent work in our group, which is mostly focused on autonomous systems with learning-enabled components in the feedback control loop. Now, to motivate this talk a little bit, this is the vision for autonomous systems that we're all thinking about. And the key drivers here that we see is that autonomous systems will be deployed very soon in totally unknown environments in the real world to accomplish complex missions. And these are some of the emerging applications, okay, that range from autonomous transportations to even applications to security and surveillance. Now, some of the research problems that we're working on in our group range from designing safe autonomous architectures, planning and controlling unknown environments for robotic systems that operate in unknown environments, to integrating vision, perception, and in general machine learning into the feedback control loop, as well as making learning more robust and verifiable. And in fact, this is the control architecture that we're advocating in our group, which will also act as an outline for the rest of this brief talk. And as you can see here, there are three major components. There is a deep learning component, and you can think of it as the perception system, as the vision system, that interacts with the real world by taking images and then processing them and then generating some classification results, some semantic information about the environment that our system operates in. And then there is a mapping box here, a mapping layer that takes us into this semantic information. It fuses them over time and then generates some environmental map. Okay, you can think of it as some semantic or geometric map of the environment that we live in. And then in an online fashion, there is a planning box that takes us into this map and then generates paths and controllers for our system. And then, of course, that are sent to the robot, and then, of course, we close the feedback loop. And the main question here that we address in our group is to understand how we can compose those three components in a safe, robust, and verifiable way without making the assumptions that each one of those components is perfect. And now from a deep learning point of view, as we all know, and it's now very well documented, neural networks are very vulnerable to input uncertainties, whether they are in the form of, for example, small changes in the lighting conditions or adversarial attacks. Such input uncertainties can cause unexpected misclassifications and unexpected neural network outputs. And this is essentially what prevents us from deploying them at large scale in safety critical systems. So in our group, we're working on how to evaluate it, but also how to enhance robustness of such neural networks. Also, from a mapping point of view, our work is focused now on how we can use this semantic information that's provided by neural networks and sensors in general, so that we can build rich representations of the environment that we live. For example, this is an experiment we ran at Perth a couple of months ago that shows a robot that navigates an a priori unknown indoor environment and in a safe way while building a semantic map of the environment. Okay, and finally, from a planning and control point of view, as I mentioned before, the goal here is to understand how we can design control inputs for our system so that we maximize the probability of satisfying some user-specified safety and mission specification, given the map that has been currently provided by the mapping layer. Again, I will not go into any technical details here. I will just show a video a simulation video that illustrates what kind of problems we're interested in solving and what kind of problems we can solve actually right now. So here in this simulation, you see a team of 20 robots that have to accomplish a complex task that requires them to visit some targets of interest, those green squares, and provide services to them while avoiding obstacles and the hostile unit that lives in the same workspace, which is this red diamond. And now what makes this problem challenging is that the robots don't know where those targets of interest are. This is captured by those Gaussian distributions that we see around them. There is also semantic uncertainty in the workspace, meaning that there is noise in our perception systems. And whenever we see someone, it's unclear if this is, it's uncertain if this is a friendly unit that I have to approach or a hostile unit that I have to avoid. And on top of that, the geometric structure of the environment is also unknown. So these gray polygons are unknown obstacles, and the red part is the part of the obstacle that we have sensed. We have also released a tool recently, which will be available for download soon, which is now connected to Gazebo and ROS. And this is, for example, a simulation video that shows how this whole control loop may work in the real world. What you see here is a team of drones, UAVs, that are flying over an unknown city in order to provide services to semantic targets while avoiding flying over certain residential areas. And with that, I will conclude the talk, and I will just say that this is a joint work of several talented students and postdocs in our group. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Yiannis. Next up, we have Cindy Sung. And speaking for Cindy's lab is Jessica McWilliams.
Hi, I'm Jessica McWilliams, and I am a PhD student in Professor Cynthia Sung's lab. If you have any questions, my email is at, this is not, all right. Well, my email is at the bottom of the previous screen. I can't figure out how to go back to it, but you can look me up. So we envision a future in which robot design is accessible to people without vast engineering experience. Consider these two people who have a design in mind. They have some problem that they want to solve, and they have an idea of how they might solve that problem. But fortunately for them, they live in the future, so they can go to the local Build-A-Bot, input their robot specifications into the software, and see how it will perform in real life. Once they are satisfied with the performance of it, then they can go they can get a bag of parts and get, sorry, I'm having some trouble with the slides, but they can get their parts kit and build it. So one example of this software is one that Cynthia developed previously called Interactive Robogami. It has in the center a design space where you can drag and drop parts. And then on the left, you have a panel that operates like a construction kit, where you can actually add parts to the robot. You can also add functional parts and customize them to your liking. The system also gives you gates where you can operate with motion plans, and it provides metrics and feedback on the gates so that you know how your robot will perform in real life. Yeah, so you can also, it outputs a full fabrication plan, giving you STL files that you can 3D print in a matter of hours, and as well as electronics, parts that you need, and connections for those parts. So with just a few hand tools and a little bit of extra time, you can easily assemble your robot and have it walking in front of you. We break the design process down into several subject sections, and these comprise the technical challenges of our lab. The first one is problem formulation. We need to figure out how we can specify the problem. Next is design generation. What design options should we present the user? Then we go into subsystem design. What subsystems need to be specified, and what are the interdependencies between the subsystems? From there, there's the option to loop back to the design generation phase. As we know that as subsystems interact, sometimes that might make the design infeasible. And next, we can move to simulation and verification and determine how the system can provide quick feedback for the user. And then finally, fabrication. We can determine whether the robot is easy to fabricate and assemble. And we want the user to be able to receive feedback from the system so that they can decide how many times they want to go back to design generation before they decide that they are satisfied with the design and can fabricate. Next, some projects in our lab. Just to give a brief overview really quickly, we look at foldable robots. These can be made of paper or mylar and can give us a variety of motions. We also develop origami mechanics models. We can treat the folds in the origami as springs. And from there, we can determine how the model will behave when you pull different tendons and apply forces at different points on a layer. You can also store energy in the pattern. Like I said, the folds are springs. So we can leverage this compliance to get motion such as the jumping of this robot. This is the rebound robot, and we're still working on it in our lab as well, but we've submitted the site cred before. Another example of dynamic motions, if you caught Turner's presentation, you're probably thinking this looks pretty similar because it's also in collaboration with Hsieh, and it's basically the juggling robot but turned upside down to exhibit hopping. We also think about how we can use the gates that are output by a software such as Robogami and put high-level behavior specifications on top of them, allowing users to take the gates they already have and intuitively design behavior. Also some self-assembly. Here's an example of a self-folding robot that folds in the presence of heat. And that concludes my talk. So I'm Jessica McWilliams. This is the rest of our lab and our collaborators, and you can have Cynthia's email is at the bottom there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Next up, we've got CJ Taylor. And while CJ's setting up, it's almost 12:30, which is our normal finishing time. This is being recorded, so if you have to leave, you can always watch the video later. These last four, so we're down to the last four speakers, and it turns out that the last four also are GRASP administration, CJ, Hsieh, Dan, Miller-Uueda, and myself. Go ahead, CJ. Oh, you're muted though.
Thank you. Good. I've set myself a timer, so hopefully I will be able to get through this. It's always a wonderful joy to present at these events. It's every year brings sort of a renewal and a chance for us to meet new people and involve them into the various projects. So really, really happy to be here. So I'm CJ Taylor, and the things that I've been working on most recently lately are topics at the interface of perception and action. I'm sort of interested in how we build robots that can perceive their environment effectively and take action, navigate safely, and those kinds of things. So I've had an opportunity to work on a number of projects ranging from flying robots to legged robots, wheeled robots, but always with this sort of core of how do we marry perception to action. So I'm just going to very briefly describe 3 projects that I've undertaken lately, but happy to talk more if you come and see me. The first is a project from a student of mine who recently graduated, Arman Shariati. And what he was interested in doing is looking at this problem of building sort of these quasi-semantic models of indoor environments. So there is mapping is, of course, one of the fundamental things that robots need to do, or at least mobile robots need to walk around in the environment. And what we were interested in doing is sort of taking a slightly different tack on it and trying to develop mapping systems that weren't simply just trying to build point clouds, but we're trying to understand the structure of the environment. So his contribution was to develop this approach that we called Occam Slam. And the idea here is that the system is actually trying to build the simplest possible model that's consistent with the data. And in doing so, it does things like naturally discover regularities like walls and floors and other kinds of systems, and is able to parse them into those kind of structures. So you're sort of seeing an example of that here. This also can be done in 3D. I'm not going to have time to sort of play the entirety of this video, but just wanted to convince you. This is one of a row house somewhere in Philadelphia. It's a 4-story row house, and we're actually able to apply this technique going upstairs, downstairs, in and around, all the while kind of building this room level representation of what's going on. Another piece of work that we've been doing lately is actually, again, inspired by our desire to sort of understand the 3D structure of the world. What we've done here is we've actually developed a deep learning system. This is the work of Chao Hu. And he's developed this system that allows us to look at an image and essentially produce a basis that comprises what we think that the depth structure of the system will be. The idea of having this basis is it allows us to do things like infer the complete structure of the scene from only a few points. So here on the top, we're seeing a situation where we have depth, but only at a few locations. And on the bottom, we have the inferred 3D structure of the complete scene. And we do this by effectively exploiting the regularities and doing it in this kind of basis formulation. The other thing that we've been able to do more recently is actually accurately characterize the uncertainty in our estimates. So this is a consequence of the way that we do things. We can build this Bayesian models, and we can actually accurately predict places where we have good estimates and places where we have bad estimates. And that's sort of very useful for practical applications. The last thing that I want to talk about is a project from another of my students, Anthony Cowley, who recently graduated. This is UpSlam. This is a system that allows us to build actually pretty detailed models from LiDAR data. So again, LiDAR mapping is something that people do quite a bit. Our take on this problem is that we've built really, really compact maps of the environment using these unions of panoramic representations. So this depth point cloud you're seeing is actually on the order of 2 orders of magnitude less than what would be required for, say traditional point cloud-based schemes, but it's just as accurate. Again, I'm probably not going to have a chance to show you the entirety of all the videos that we have here. Let me just sort of leave you with one. This is a external data set. I'll turn down the music on that. And hopefully give you an idea of sort of the quality of the representations that we're able to build. Okay, so there's a lot going on here that I'm not going to have time to explain. There's an entire pipeline for doing rasterization and rendering based on this representation. But suffice to say, if you're interested in perception and its application to robotics, I'm really happy to talk with you. So I'm going to end it right there.
Thank you, CJ. Next up, we have Hsieh. It's kind of funny. CJ was the deputy director of GRASP, and Ani is now the next deputy director of GRASP. So Ani, take it away.
Okay, so I think I have remote control now. Okay, so I'm Ani Hsieh. So our lab, which is the Scalable Autonomous Robots Lab, so this is Scalar. And so this is always a great seminar because we have the opportunity as faculty to actually catch up on some of the work that our colleagues do, in addition to meet new students and welcome everybody back for the new year. So in our lab, we mostly focus on multi-robot systems, swarms, distributed autonomy. We tend to take a dynamical systems approach to how we address some of these problems. And more recently, we've focused a lot of our applications to geosciences, so things like marine applications, geology, field geology, and those kinds of problems. So the way to think about this, a lot of environmental monitoring, distributed estimation, and then trying to think about how do you get robust and good performance, especially when you have to deal with distributed communication. Let me see if I can advance my slide. There we go. So this is one example. The idea here is how do we get a team of robots to be able to go out, collect data about a process that is changing across both space as well as time. So this is actually a challenging problem because you have to be able to figure out, map what's going on about the process. So you have to think about how do you collect the data, where should you be collecting the data, and oftentimes, especially if you think about large environments like the ocean, you probably don't have the amount of sensors that is needed to cover the large space that you want to operate in. And so in these cases, you're going to have this problem of how do you work with this limited resources that you have. So once you've collected this data, how do you fuse that? You can hopefully use that representation to reallocate your resources as needed, because the process itself that you're trying to track is changing over time, right? And so some of the questions that we think about, when we think about these types of problems is sort of what are the correct set of features we should be thinking about when we're trying to model, trying to measure these dynamic spatial temporal processes. So the video that you're seeing is basically a dye experiment. So you can think about this as a proxy for, the distribution or sort of the spread dispersion of some kind of a contaminant like an oil spill in the ocean, or some kind of like ash clouds in the atmosphere, and how do you get robots to do this? We have a autonomous boat that is water-worthy or Schuylkill-worthy that can be deployed from behind the Pennovation, assuming once we can get everybody back on campus. So some of these, so these are some of the examples of the problems that we're interested in. Another type of problem that we have is, oops, I'm going to go back real quickly. see if I can, otherwise I'm just gonna talk on this slide is, so we're talking about how do we map these kinds of dynamic environments? What are the right set of features? If you have a map, if you have a good representation, how would you be able to do better planning and control, for your vehicles that are operating in these, changing environments where now your vehicle control is also somewhat coupled with the environmental control. So some examples again are robots operating in the ocean, and then as well as magnetic micro robots that are actuated by an external field. So some of the questions that we ask, I'm not sure why the videos are not playing, so I'm going to try. So this is an example of a magnetic millimeter size robot, and we're basically being really clever how we exploit the nonlinearities in the magnetic force field in order to be able to drive this from one part of the workspace to the other. And so we're really thinking about how do you leverage the environmental dynamics for planning and for control, both of single as well as multiple micro robots. So let's see. I can go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to sort of end with this one, which we're trying to think about how do you use data to be able to do system identification on, complex systems that exhibit complex dynamics. So the video here is an example of a swarm of starlings, right? And so this, so the question is, how would you model these? How can you learn from data? And from the dynamics, how do you infer intent? So I'm going to stop here for, based on, because my alarm is going off. And then I'm going to, for those of you who are interested, please visit our website and contact us and get involved. I'm going to pass this back to Marc.
Great, thank you, Ani. Next up, we've got Dan Miller-Uueda. And Dan is actually not a professor, but he represents all our outreach for GRASP, and recently now the Associate Director for Education and Outreach. Dan.
Hi, everybody. It's really sad to not do this in person, but so I just want to talk about a few of the programs that we have going on at GRASP, and they are things that people can absolutely get involved with. So there are two main goals for the work that we do regarding outreach, and that's first, how can we inform the public about the research going on? And then second, how can we help Philadelphia students actually become engineers or become engineering researchers? So I'm not going to talk about the left side too much. That's kind of like our big outreach events, which we definitely participated a lot in, and the tours, our social media and website are a large part of how we inform the public. So I'm going to focus on the right side. What do we do to support local students? So just some brief impact numbers. Typically, in a typical year, this was anything but a typical year, but in a typical year, we have about 74 summer students who participate in GRASP run programs. And we also have about three to four interns. We run tours for over 1,000 students. We participate in multiple large events like the USA Science and Engineering Festival down in Washington, D.C. And we created a course at GSE, a certificate course called, it's a computational thinking course, or helped create a course. And then we worked with 27 School District Philadelphia middle school teachers through an RET program. We did a data collection system with the School of Arts and Sciences to track the impact of our programs. And we're in partnerships with multiple nonprofits around the region. So that's just a quick snapshot of the impact that we have. So then to get into some of the programs, so our two biggest programs for impacting Philadelphia students, AI for All is a program created by Tahia Salam and Matt Malencia, and created and run, and they did an amazing job. They had about 20 students from Philly. And the SMP program, the summer mentorship program, this year we had 17 students. We typically have 20 as well. So AI for All is a program on artificial intelligence, and SMP is a program on robotics. They're both, well, AI for All is a 2-week program. SMP is a 4-week program. Students are paid a stipend to participate. Then internships, like I said, we have about 3 to 4 students who receive internships. Two of them are funded through a program from the Army. That's a program called REAP. And so GRASP has hosted 4 students in the last 3 years. 2 of those 4 are now Penn Engineering students. One of them did an internship in Kostas's lab. And then we do a lot of focus on teacher learning, so professional development. We ran an RET program here for 3 years, and a lot of GRASP students and postdocs got involved with, and faculty. We're currently seeking funding, submitting a proposal October 7th to continue that research. We helped create that computational thinking course that I mentioned, and we also helped GSC develop their Woodrow Wilson STEM teaching program. And then finally, so I mentioned some of the partnerships. There are multiple organizations around the city, like the Philadelphia STEM Ecosystem and the Philadelphia STEM Equity Collective, that GRASP is a representative of Penn Engineering at these meetings, working to make STEM more accessible to Philadelphia students. And we also have strong partnerships with the School District of Philadelphia. And I just want to mention that there are multiple students who have graduated from GRASP, and all the people pictured here were heavily, heavily involved with outreach. I can't see my notes right now, but of these people, I think 3/4 of them are now faculty at multiple universities. So I just want to say that it is a good thing to do, to be involved with outreach. It is important to the lab, but it's also, it is beneficial to you in your career. I think that these are great individuals who helped out with work in the past. So if you want to get involved with the outreach programs at GRASP, there are lots of email requests that go out. Just respond to those. That's the easiest way, because these things happen. They tend to be in the moment. And then you can reach out to volunteer. I know this summer I've had a lot of people reach out because of current events. People want to help out. And the weird thing is that now there's not a lot going on right now because everything's shut down. But you can also contact me to support ideas. Like Tahia reached out to me 2 years ago now, I think, or a year and a half ago, about the AI for All program. So if you need support for programs, I absolutely can do that. My contact information is at the bottom. Thank you very much. Hope to see you all soon.
Thank you, Dan. That was wonderful. So turns out that the last person to speak is me, and that's mostly because my name ends with Y I am. I'm at the end of the, which is convenient, I guess. So I'm going to talk about my lab. Thank you everyone for sticking around. It's we're only 15, well, we'll be about 20 minutes behind schedule. So I will still try to go quickly. Let me set my timer so I don't cheat. I don't have someone else timing for me. So I'm going to give you an update for what we do in my lab. Basically, Mod Lab is built around mostly modular robotics. That's what it stands for. So we've been building robots. Essentially, a modular robot is one that has modules that can rearrange themselves so they can form like a snake or a human shape or a dog or whatever you like. And then there are lots of the issues of how do you control them, how do you do planning for the reconfiguration. There's a bunch of mechanical and manufacturing issues, and how do you design them and build them so that they work, especially if you're going to build a lot of them. One of our more recent designs is what we call a variable topology truss. So here's an animation of what it might do in a search and rescue type situation. The basic idea is that there are truss members that can change their length. So it's a really efficient structure that can move around like this, but also the topology of the truss can change, which makes it much more versatile and also much more difficult to design and build and control. So this is the latest in terms of our systems. It's an octahedron. We have the thing that we call a spiral zipper, which is the element that changes the link lengths. The kind of aluminum linkages that you see in the middle at each node is what's used to reconfigure, and they can reconfigure, but it's not really that great. So we're currently working on our second version that will focus more on the reconfiguration aspects. New for this year, we're doing this project with Michael Posa talked briefly about it, but also James Pickle, who's the PI in mechanical engineering. Soft robots for the main application now we're looking at is patient manipulation. Can we move patients around with soft robots? And we're working with a nursing professor on that, which is an interesting and difficult problem. Another project that a set of projects that we're working on is with flying robots. So we have the world's record for the smallest flying vehicle. This is about 28 millimeters in diameter. We had a DARPA project to build one even smaller. So it's less than, I can't tell you the exact dimensions, but it's less than 2 centimeters and less than 2 grams ultimately. So we do have that. We also recently have a new grant to explore swarms of these flying robots. So we're going to build 200 of them. The idea is that they will fly around forming 3-dimensional shapes that a human can kind of interact with. So how do you make them safe? How do you interact with them? How do you do the control? We'll have this local sensing and swarm-based control. One of the main problems with these tiny robots is how long can they fly for, and it's basically not long. So one of the ideas is how can you make them fly around longer? Basically, the idea is to focus on recharging. If we can make them recharge very quickly, then we can have essentially what we call infinite endurance. They can fly for as long as they like. Just have a lot of them that are flying around, forming the shape and recharging as they go. So one of the things that my group is also looking at is when you have a big swarm of them, the wake, the downwash that's being generated by each one will basically wipe out everyone beneath them. So you have to be very careful about that. You can either plan around them, or what we're looking at is, can we design the propellers in a way that minimizes the wake, which is actually a very difficult problem. Last thing that I'd like to talk about is another, I think this is the last one, for a new project that's also starting. This is using Marc Miskin's robots, these little tiny, tiny microscopic robots. Can we use them in a manufacturing setting? So if we have something like a 3D printer and we put these robots in there, can they be used using swarm-based local rules to change the structure as we manufacture the structures to have different properties? So if we have a 3D printed kind of hexagonal area, maybe if you have 10,000 of these little guys that can also add material or remove material, can you make it stiffer or flexible or whatever property you may want, based on basically like the way biology does with termite mounds and wasp nests and that kind of thing. So here's, we have about 15 students, 15 PhD students, and another couple dozen masters and undergrads. You can see them on this, my website, or you can send me an email. Our lab is at Perch. And that's it for my 5 minutes. Thank you everyone for attending. If you would like to see, this will all be on the web again. If you've missed anything, you can go back and contact people. Thanks for attending.